Hey guys, welcome to the channel. It's D2 Tubbs. Today I'm going to be showing you how to build a PC. So right now I'm going to go over the parts that you're going to be needing for your PC. Your power supply. Your power supply is going to have multiple cables to it. You're going to have your 24 pin connector. You're going to have your CPU connector. Depending on what motherboard you're going to use, you can use either the 4 or the 8 pin. Like I said, it just depends on the motherboard. Some power supplies are modular or non-modular. This one is non-modular, to where I have separate cables that I can plug in and choose which ones I need. And then the non-modular power supplies, you obviously all your cables are just poking out and it's not as organized. Okay, will be the PCIe connector. This will connect to your graphics card. Generally, you'll have 2 separate cables, and then you'll have an 8-pin connector for each, or it can be a 6-pin as well. If you want it to be an 8-pin, you just attach it like that. And then also, we're going to have the SATA cable. The SATA cable is super thin. This plugs into your hard drive, your SSD, or even depending on what kind of case you have. Sometimes if you have a case with RGBs, you'll have an adapter, and then you'll have a little SATA connector down here, and you just plug that in, and it can also connect your lights and give them power for your fans. Okay guys, brief overview on the rest of the components you're going to need to build your PC. You're going to need a graphics card. In today's market, I know it's a little rough to get one right now, especially with the inflation on CPU. Preferably, just depending on the CPU you want to go with, at least 8 cores. And then we have the RAM. I always go with 16 gigabytes for game. Hertz preferable. You can go down to 3,000. It's not that big of a deal. Try to save a few bucks. And then you also have your SSD. You can go with an M.2, or you can just go with your typical solid state drive. It's completely up to you what you want to do. Here I went with a 500 gigabyte WD Black. And then last but not least, a CPU cooler with a liquid cooler this time. This is going to be my first time building with a liquid cooler. I've always used fans. We'll see how it goes. And also, you will need some thermal paste as well. The CPU cooler I just purchased has the thermal paste already on it itself, so I will not have to apply any. Alrighty, so the first thing I'm going to be installing is the power supply. With your mid tower, you take it apart, of course, it should be open. You just slide your power supply in. You want to line the hose, make sure all the hoses are lined up, so you can just screw it right in. You'll need a Phillips head screwdriver for this part. Make sure it's tight. Right. And last one. Alrighty, and that's it. And another thing you're going to be needing is a motherboard. Ordering a motherboard, you want to make sure it's the right size for the tower that you're building on, whether it's a mini tower, a full tower, a mid tower. I have a micro ATX board here. With the build that I'm currently building on, I do have a mid tower, so it fits a full ATX and a micro ATX motherboard, which I'm using right here. So it fits both. So first thing, we're going to be putting the CPU in. Before we put the CPU in though, we got to take this out. So this little lever right here, no matter if you're building Intel or AMD, both of them will have a lever. You take that lever, you push it up, you pull it up. This should come up as well. And then just put a little force, not too much. You don't want to break anything. And this should pop right off. Alrighty guys, next thing we're going to be putting in is the CPU now. A little arrow notifying you saying, hey, you know, there's another arrow on the motherboard. This is what I need to be matched up with. On the bottom left right here, I have another arrow on the motherboard, and on the bottom left of this right now, I have an arrow. So I know those two are going to match up. It should just sit in place. You should not have to be rough with this at all. Like I said, that just set perfectly in there. Once you have the CPU in, you're going to move this down. You're going to take your lever. This will take some force. Do not be scared to push it down. It's going to take a lot of force because it has to be secure. Just make sure you push it down and get it under that clip, and you're good to go. So for this part, I'm starting to put the CPU cooler on. You're going to want to follow the instructions on whatever CPU cooler you're using. For the HD60 that I'm using right now, put the Intel bracket on the back. It's different if you're AMD, or depending on what type of Intel chip you're using, the motherboard will be compatible with, of course. So I'm just sitting that in there. There's some adhesive that's on this bracket that's going to settle down and help it stick to the back of this. All right, right now we're going to be putting the CPU 8-pin port through. There's a little hole on the top right here. I want to go ahead and put this up through here. Depending on the motherboard, sometimes it will block this from coming through, or sometimes it'll just, you won't have enough leeway or hand room to get it pushed through or on the motherboard. So it's a little rough. So what I do is go ahead and push this through, and then I'll go ahead and put the motherboard down, and then I'll connect that, and then I'll screw the motherboard in. It'll make your life a lot easier. All right, so the next thing we're doing is going to be putting the motherboard into the tower now. You just want to go ahead and just set that down and get this over. Get this out the way. And looks like we're in there. Now, to install the motherboard and make sure it's secured on each, throughout the motherboard, there's going to be little holes right there, right there. There's going to be some up top. There's one, two, there's one right behind here. It's kind of hard to see. And then there's a third one that's completely blocked off, and it's really hard to see right there. And then you have a couple down here as well. Now, depending on the motherboard that you have, and of course the tower that you have, there will only be certain spots that you can screw the screws into. It's pretty easy to notice. If you look inside the hole, if you get close enough, you'll be able to see where you can screw it into. Some of the inserts you won't even be able to use, but the ones you will be able to use, you'll know what they are. Alrighty, now I'm going to insert my 8-pin CPU connector for my power supply into the motherboard. There's the 8-pin right there. You're going to want to make sure that the pins are going to align with the pins in the motherboard. So I don't know if you're going to be able to see this. Try. Yeah, my hand's going to block you here. I'm just going to make sure these pins align. Sometimes it's a little rough to get in. You just got to maneuver it around, and then push, put a little force into it, make sure it's clicked down, and then there you go, it's connected. All right, so next step is installing your water cooler. Generally, you can do this before putting the motherboard in, but since I'm using a water cooler, I'm doing it afterwards. I want to make sure that I can get my fan to line up correctly, and for this end to fit on my CPU fine without being in my way. I will not be recording this part. This will take me a second. This is my first time doing this. Okay, so we got the CPU cooler installed. The next thing I'm going to be installing is the M.2 SSD. On what motherboard you have, you might not be able to put an SSD in your, or an M.2 SSD in your motherboard. My motherboard here has two slots. It has the primary slot, and then it has a secondary slot for one. If you have a motherboard that has one slot, of course, just put it in that one slot. And if you don't have one, then you're going to go with a, your typical solid state drive. And then you'd use a SATA cable for that. Here we go. Take these teeth, kind of put the SSD M.2 at an angle, and then you're gonna want to feel it around. Don't put too much pressure right here until you find, it's a little different on this one, where the teeth would just click in. The teeth just went in pretty smoothly right there. And now I'm just gonna have to take a screw and screw that in. So the next thing we're going to be putting in is our RAM, DDR4 Vengeance Corsair RAM. That's what I have right now. This is your RAM slots. I'm going to be inserting my RAM in the 1 and 3 slot. Depending on your motherboard, you might have to put it in your 2 and your 4 slot. That will be in your manual. That is, like I said, it just depends on what kind of motherboard you're buying and how that tells you need to do it. Now, when you're putting the RAM in, you just want to align it, the bottom teeth. Sorry, this water pump's in my way a bit still. Gotta get that in there. And then you want to put a little pressure. Once you feel it that it's in the slot, push a little pressure. And I think you guys just heard it click right there on that side. And then on the bottom, I pushed hard and it clicked down there as well. That means the RAM is inserted properly. Now, some motherboards do not have it where it needs to click on the bottom. The bottom will already be clicked up. The top will just have to click. And that's all. Let me grab my other sticker RAM. And then same thing, 3 slot, just make sure the teeth are inside the slots. Okay. I'm good now. Click that side down, click that side down, and we're all good. The RAM is. Alright, so the next thing I'm going to be doing is pushing my 24-pin power connector through this slot to the top, because that's where my 24-pin connector is located. And then I'm going to take my PCIe, this is for your graphics card, and it's more towards the middle of the motherboard. So I'm going to slide these through here. I'm not the greatest with cable management. You can do your PC any way you want, of course. If you're very tedious and like your computer to be perfect, you're gonna have to teach yourself cable management. That's the worst thing about building a PC. But that's that. And then when it's pushed through, I'm gonna go ahead and lay this back down. This is just easier for me. Here's my 24-pin connector. Just a 24-pin slot on the motherboard. I believe the teeth go this way. There we go. Should hear a tiny click when it's pinned down, and that's in there. I don't have the graphics card inserted yet, so we're gonna hold off on this for a second. Okay, so now we're gonna be using the front panel connectors. I'm gonna be connecting them right here. Connection types I have is a reset switch, a power switch, and then this is the power LED, the positive and the negative. Now, normally there will be a, what do you call it? A HDD LED plug on the bottom next to the reset switch. For this case, it does not have one. So if you do have one, it plugs right below the positive and negative power LEDs. So the first 2 connectors, this will be really hard for me to show. I don't have a good camera to show you this part. But on the first 2 pins of your front panel, the top 2 will be your positive and negative LEDs. And then right next to it will be the power switch. And then right below the power switch, you would do the reset switch, which is that one. So positive and negative power LED, then your power switch right next to it, and then under your power switch, you'll use your reset switch. And that'll be all. 3.0. Right here is my USB 3.0 point. Some motherboards have them up by the 24 pin. It would be right here generally. It just depends what kind of motherboard you have. So let's take it, plug it in, make sure you hear a little click. I mean, you can feel it go in, and it's in there. Okay, So the next two connectors we're going to be dealing with, the first one is going to be the audio connector. On my motherboard, it is on the far left over here. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and plug that in. There we go. Then the next one is the USB. I have a USB 1 port and a USB 2. I'm going to plug it into my USB 1. All right, and they are inserted. Okay, so the next thing we're going to be installing is the graphics card. I'm going to have to unscrew a lot of these screws right here so I can get the graphics card to fit. Some light. I don't know how much room it's going to need. I'm just going to go ahead and unscrew 3 of them. And then if I want to, I can just screw them back in if I don't need that much room. All right. Now, you take your graphics card. You have these teeth at the bottom, and then you're going to have your slot right here for your graphics card. This is going to be pushed down because when this clicks, it's going to mean your graphics card is locked in. So I'm going to go ahead and try to squeeze this in here without. Alright, we heard a pop. Now, the screws that you just unscrewed to take the little metal piece that brackets out, you can use that same screw just to screw in the graphics card. Oops. Like I said, it helps to have a magnetic screwdriver. It's really the best thing you can have. Basically, where you unscrew that from, you just screw that right back in. It's in there, it's solid and tight. And now, earlier, like I said, you have your PCIe cables. That's these 2 cables right here. The graphics card that I'm using right now is only a 6-pin connector. So I only have to use one of the pieces right here. Which one do I want to use for better cable management? Oh, that's rough. All right, we'll just use this one for now. I'll figure out what to do with the rest. Like I said, just make sure it matches up. The pins match up with the pins on the graphics card as well. And that's inserted. And like I said, cable management is literally the last thing I worry about doing. And that's pretty much it for that. So at this point, after you install your graphics card, you're pretty much done except for cable management. Now at this time, you're going to want to organize your cables as best as you can to make the PC look as neat as possible. But I did miss one thing when building this. I have 3 fan connectors that I need to install, and I didn't have enough spaces or slots available on my motherboard to install them. So I did have to run to Best Buy and grab an adapter so I can install them. Do not make that mistake. Make sure you have everything ready because it's a headache if you don't have it all. Like I said, some mid towers will have an adapter already in place. Like for instance, this one already had for my RGBs for my fans, but it didn't have any slots available for the fans themselves to run. So alright, so I went ahead and installed onto here. On the back, it's just a little bit of adhesive, sticky things. Pretty simple to put on and just stick to the back of your PC. You can stick it whatever, kind of like a pop socket. And then I went ahead and connected all the 3-pin headers. I don't have a 4-pin, so obviously I can't use that last pin. Don't freak out if you have 3-pin connectors. It'll still work. Your fans will still function perfectly fine. It's not that big of a deal. And yeah, that's pretty much how you install that. Actually, so I kind of missed something here. There's one cable that plugs into the SATA that comes off of the adapter piece. I got that plugged in right there. And then on the other end of the PC, you just got to bring one of the USB ports through. And sorry for the bad video quality, but I went ahead and plugged the second port into the USB 2 slot, which is right over here. And I still have my USB 1 plugged in to the left of it, which is for all my USB ports on my PC. Okay, and here is the finished product. I fixed some of the cables. I have them running back under. I'm not the best with cable management, like I said. I'm probably going to be looking at YouTube videos myself, looking at Pal to manage my cables better. Never been very good at it, but as long as it's not too sloppy, you're all good. I could possibly still mess around with the water cooler, kind of reposition it differently. I'm not for sure yet what I'm going to do. Kind of don't want like the way it looks right there. And then, of course, I got to wait on my new graphics card to come in. Either a 6800 or a 3070 is what I'm hoping to get if they ever come back in stock. But that's it, guys. That's how you build a PC. I'll show you how to enter the BIOS and then how you would just install your Windows, and that's pretty much it. Now that we have everything put together, we're just going to power it on, make sure everything's running smoothly. When booting your PC for the first time, it is going to put you straight into BIOS mode. When you go into BIOS, we're going to tweak a few things like your RAM settings and your fan temperatures. And I have to press delete to enter my BIOS since I already have Windows installed. So give me a second. Alrighty, now that we're in the BIOS, we're going to go down to overclock. In this section, you're going to see the RAM right here. This is the only thing I really tinker with at all. You're going to go click on your RAM frequency and check the highest one available. Mine is 2933. I have even though my RAM is 3200, this is the max my motherboard will allow. So I selected that, and then yeah, that's pretty much it on that part. Now we're going to go over to your hardware monitor. And in here, you can check all your fans. So the first thing that's popping up is my CPU. This will show you the degree Celsius at which or how fast the pump will be going. Then you have your system one, which is actually my fans in the front right here. This also I controlled myself. I did this chart myself. I think, you know, it's just best for my temperatures, and I really don't want to hear my fans at 100%. And my PC doesn't get that hot anyway, so it sounds pretty quiet. After you finish all this and edit all these settings, you're going to hit the X, and then you're going to hit X again. Right here, generally, it'll tell you all the changes that you have made in the account. If you made any changes that you didn't need to make, you would click no. And obviously, if everything's okay, you're going to click yes. Now, before you click yes, since this is your first time booting your computer up, you're going to want to make sure you have your flash drive with the Windows installed on it. You're going to plug it into your PC. You can plug it into the top or the back of the PC. And then you're going to hit yes. Your PC will then restart. And since you don't have your Windows installed yet, it will boot you up into the Windows installation page. And then you'll just install Windows from there and go on with the initial setup. It'll, you know, what country do you live in, what's your email, things like that. And then you finish all that up and it'll boot you straight into your Windows home screen. Now, when mine boots up, obviously, since I have Windows installed, it'll boot me right into the lock screen for my Windows. It'll boot right up, and then you're pretty much all good. Now, there is one thing I do want to mention. If you're using a Ryzen CPU, download Ryzen Master to check your CPU temperatures. If you're not using a Ryzen CPU and you're using an Intel like me, then you're going to want to use HW Monitor, a Cupid HW Monitor. This will allow you to see your CPU temperatures and make sure, you know, your temps are okay and your PC's not going to shut off on you because it's overheating. Right here, you're going to see the temperatures, and right now it looks like I'm right below 30 degrees Celsius on most things, and I'll also show you the Fahrenheit. When you're playing video games, you do not want to be over 80 Celsius. That's too hot, and if your PC or your CPU reaches 100, it'll automatically shut down on you to protect itself. But guys, that's it. I hope you finished your builds, and I hope you like them.